Hey everybody, how's it going? Hope you all had a good week. I think we're off to a good start. I've seen all the papers now, the first papers, and I've seen a bunch of the second um, assignment um, stuff. That would be the leads assignment. And I'm impressed with what I've seen so far. So anyway, let's just talk about like the next thing. I want to kind of go a little bit more into the depth of reporting, or sorry, depth of writing really, and what I look for, what I expect. Kind of continuation of like some of the chapters we just read, 7, 19, 7, 9, and 13, but also go into, in case you didn't notice, by the way, I actually changed the order of the reading assignments. Again, I didn't think it would be a big deal because, like I said, I don't test you guys on this anyway. Your tests are your writing assignments, but I actually moved chapter 11, which is about interviewing, up to now. And so I'm going to discuss chapters 10 and 11 during this lecture. Okay. So, um, anyway, I'm also going to talk to you about a little bit more about the actual structure of a news story and what to look for in terms of like when you do your interviewing, come up with ideas for an assignment. And actually, that's what our next assignment is going to be. So there's a whole bunch of stuff to deal with right now. So let's start with this. Let's first like just review, because when you see this, it will be the due date of the leads worksheet assignment. Let's share the screen here. Okay. All right. So that's my dog in the background. Yes, I know. She's does that. She's old. I say hi, Lily. Hi. All right. Anyway. All right. So here is, no, that's not it. Okay. Sorry about that. Actually, you see my filing system there. There we go. So, I mean, I'm just going to go to rehash a little bit here. All right. Doing with that pinwheel right there. As you can see, again, no headlines, actual leads. What I've seen so far are leads. That's good. I might see something that I feel is like kind of left out. Again, some of the things to look for really here, again, like the biggest, newest things, because something big may happen, but then something bigger may happen after that. Okay. So you want to make sure your lead has that biggest, newest thing in it. Big hint, numbers are big. Numbers really like tell the story in so many different ways. Data. I mean, data is such a huge, I would say, theme for so many stories nowadays, thanks to the internet and thanks to the fact that so many things can be generated online now than they were 25 years ago. So, numbers matter. Numbers can tell a story, just a percentage or whatever. Okay. So and the reason why I bring it up is because the whole idea of this assignment is really try to narrow your focus to something as specific as possible, as I asked you to do in the first assignment. So when you narrow something down to a number, and a number can tell a whole story, then that's a good way of learning how to focus on something specifically, is narrowing down to a number. Okay, if that makes any sense. So anyways, you'll see in some of these, okay, again, I just expect you to turn these leads on a Microsoft Word doc, submit it. But some of these involve numbers, some of these involve like odd things that happen, some of these involve odd motives. There's a certain oddness, uniqueness in some of these. Okay. All right. So don't forget that is due when you'll see this, it'll be on Monday. So that is due on Monday, end of day Monday. Okay. One thing I want to kind of continue, and it kind of goes into a little bit about like, because today is going to deal with like more about the interviewing way of doing things. Okay. Or sorry, the interview, what I look for in terms of interviewing and how that kind of fits into like the structure that I've been talking about as certain structures in news stories, and I've been basically giving you basically a general structure, but there's actually like a more specific structure now that we're like a few weeks in that I like to talk to you about, and it really like actually can kind of relate more um, to your profile stories you're doing right now and the next assignment you'll do, which have more depth than your typical like crime story, that sort of thing. Um, and it's something to keep in mind actually when you do your interviewing process, because again, the interview really kind of focuses on some central theme, some central point. Okay. And that's identified in the lead of the story. Okay. But then once you identify that lead, as we just did in this leads assignment, you have to provide the depth. You have to provide more of the who, what, where, why, when, how. And the way to do that is through the use of transitions. Okay. And if I haven't talked about this already, if I've done it already, I don't remember exactly. I apologize. Okay. A transition helps guide the reader through the story. Okay. Oh, the transitions do, I should say. They're almost like mini leads. Okay. So if you have a story about John Brown works at a finance company, you know, you want to like go into a little bit more depth than you would maybe like on a crime story. Okay. On a crime story, typically the story works like this. Okay. It's like what happened, and then it's essentially transitions. It's like step from step to step. These are like steps of the story that bring you to one point to the next. Okay. It's very bare bones. And you basically like who was hurt, why did it happen? You answer the very basic questions. Okay. But with the kind of story we're doing with these profiles, okay, you get a little more depth. So you work them in with transitions that help guide you from point to point. And like I said, John Brown works in finance. And then your transition basically like will deal with like more specific elements of that, much like the crime story would. Okay. The who, what, where's, why, why's, and when's. Okay. So, obviously, what does he do? That's one of the first things, or she. Okay. What does he do? All right. Now, the difference between like a crime story and this story is, like I said, you go a little more depth. So in between these transitions, you go into what's called an anecdote. Okay. So this basically provides more of a slice of life on the street kind of experience that relates to the transition and then overall the lead. Okay. All right. So basically, maybe you typically do like maybe some sort of slice of life, like like John Brown. Maybe what does he do? So we'll say he works for I don't know, someplace like Morgan Stanley or something like that. We'll deal with accounts from all over the world, finding himself working from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. every day. Okay, so something a little more specific, something more real. Okay. So you're doing a story. You're kind of like you have your overall, you have your transition that kind of eliminates the overall, and then you have an anecdote that helps eliminate the transition. Okay, and then maybe it's a good time to actually maybe come in with a quote. Again to provide some color. The job can suck, but it pays well. I think it shows a little bit more emotion. Okay. Then you can do like a rinse repeat situation. You go back to your next transition. It helps you kind of bring you from point to point, again, providing more depth to the overall story. And some answers more questions, stuff like that. So then you basically would do something along the lines of, maybe again answering the who, what, where, why, when questions. You know, and we mentioned pay already. I guess maybe something along the lines of, now where did you kind of where it could be like Manhattan. That's something that we can mention briefly. Why does he do it? Well, money. So maybe like Brown says the job pays well and helps pay for his luxurious lifestyle. Oh my God, it's awful. Say it's luxurious. Yeah, no, wow, good for me. Thank you. Lifestyle. And then maybe get to an anecdote. He rides a boat. He owns a boat that he docks. I don't know. And where do rich people dock their boats? In Monmouth County, New Jersey. Actually, more specifically, a rich person's place like Shrewsbury. And he likes getting drunk on it. Ha ha ha. No, that's not good. And he likes the peacefulness of the Navasink River. So I spell Navasink? I don't know. I spell differently. And then maybe another quote. See, then you go through this whole rinse repeat. So you basically have your overall, something a little more specific that kind of like brings out the who, what, where's, why's, when's, and then something kind of like close to the ground, slice of life that brings even more depth to the story in the form of an anecdote, a story within a story. Okay. And then a quote, and then back to a transition, and then an anecdote. So this all comes this. So it's interesting because like I always like a lot of times when I actually do my stories and I do interviewing, um, I actually feel like I sometimes can almost kind of guess beforehand what the person might say. I mean, it doesn't always work out that way. Sometimes it kind of goes in a different direction. It's always good to do some research before you actually do the actual interviewing. And I might actually write out like kind of a rough outline if it's something maybe this person's on the internet, so I maybe know some things already about them. So maybe it's like good to like even like kind of write like a little bit of like a story like that I just did beforehand. Okay. Um, which brings us, I know we did, I asked for 10 and 11. Let's go straight to 11 actually. Okay. Because 11 deals with quotes, quotations and attribution, which I've already dealt a bit with. Okay. And we've dealt a little bit with this too. Okay. So preparing for the interview, no matter what kind of story a reporter writes, usually will require at least one interview. Successful interviews do not just happen; they are the product of thought and planning. So, I mean, you can't always do this on a crime story, especially. You don't really learn what happens until you actually get there. You might have some general idea because you might have seen something on the internet, on the wire, on Twitter, whatever, social media, whatever. So you might have some general idea because, like, a lot of this stuff, especially like on the major highways, is posted already by like the major highways, like the New Jersey Turnpike Authority in New Jersey handles both the Garden State Parkway and New Jersey Turnpike. Okay, so they might actually print something already. But it's just your job to actually go out and find out the who, what, where's, and why's. Okay. Um, basically it's a good idea to like come up with some sort of a checklist. The basic facts and details, including names, especially names, dates, and locations. I mean, you know, somewhat I talk about the importance of depth, but also there's also the importance of facts. Okay. And if you're writing a story about somebody who's in finance, successful in finance, I mean, does it really matter to the person at Rutgers if the person doesn't go to Rutgers? No. So it's actually a good idea. What I was trying to make my point before was that person was probably, if I was writing for Rutgers audience, know your audience. Write about a Rutgers person who's graduated and been successful or something. Okay. You want to look for things like chronology, showing the unfolding of events. Obviously, what's new, what's unique is important, but especially what's new, the latest, biggest thing that happened. If you have an abortion protest, I'll give you only a hint. Is it all about the protest? Is that the only thing that happened? Okay. So you look for stuff like that. Relationships among people, organizations, or issues involved. Obviously, you look for maybe like certain trending issues. Um, especially, I mean, I had one person who wrote a story from my in-person writing for media class. And she kind of buried the fact that this person was selected for some sort of UN program. And she was like one of only like 5 people in the country to do it. So obviously that's significant. The UN is like international. There's only one of them. So you look for that sort of significant thing that might be like a part of their present history. Okay. I mentioned about anecdotes, eliminate events or issues and make them more dramatic and understandable for readers and viewers, something that kind of backs up everything. Okay. Provides more depth. I mean, some of this other stuff is not as important. I mean, mannerisms, things like that. So how many sources are enough? I mean, this story we just did, I mean, I probably would be like, I feel you actually did stories where like you were kind of ripping into like certain, people were basically upset with the places they worked and stuff like that. I would not normally not if you were doing a profile story, you would not normally like just have one source on the story. In fact, with a profile story, you really should actually, um, you really should, um, you really I have to stop this person. You really should, actually the worst person, you can have, for a, actually not the worst person, I'm sorry. So I got somebody's actually bugging me. So I'm a big Mets fan, and I have this friend, I have this friend that lives out in Oakland, and he's like bugging me because he's on the train to Oakland. He actually lives out in Oakland. Big Mets fans. We're very excited this year. The Mets are doing really well, and we're hoping that they win the freaking, pennant. Um, he wants me to mention. Oh well, forget it. Anyway, so I'm actually like to have him as a guest speaker. Um, so and actually, yeah, guest speaker. I'll actually ask him right now. There we go. So anyway, all right. So anyway, when you do a story about profile on somebody, you actually shouldn't always just have that one person as actually, and sometimes the person you're profiling is not the best source. Think about it. Are they really like objective about themselves? Obviously they should know more about themselves than anybody, but a lot of times they don't. A lot of times they don't know enough about themselves. A lot of times people like haven't gone through that whole change of life experience that they really need to have. So maybe it's better to actually interview other people. So I'm not asking you guys to go back and interview additional people for your profiles. I'm just saying that's what you would typically do, is you would actually get somebody else as another source, especially if you're like having somebody who's criticizing the place they work at or something. That would be, you obviously want to get like, another person, another counterpoint. It doesn't. There's a lot of misconceptions about that, about the whole additional source thing. It should be pro con. No, it doesn't have to be pro con. It's just important to have additional perspectives. People can see different shades of gray and things like that for a news story. Okay. Obviously, any kind of preparation is important. I it says prepare questions. And like I said, sometimes if I can actually almost kind of guess what, the story is going to be about, I can almost like kind of like almost, I mean, you don't want to make up anything, obviously, but you can kind of almost like guess what maybe they might say. You don't want to like put questions in their mouths or something like that, or put answers in their mouths. But I'm just saying, you just want to like kind of have kind of a general idea, like you can see the future and be able to ask the questions you need to ask, and that way you'll be ready if you know like how they might answer. Okay, that's why I have you interview. That's why I think it's a good idea to interview people in class, or when I have you in person class, or interview people when I have a remote class, because that way you have some sort of institutional knowledge ahead of time, and you can kind of prepare and almost kind of ask questions and know what maybe how they might answer ahead of time. But they may surprise you. Okay, always allow yourself the opportunity to be surprised. It happens all the time. Okay, conducting the interview, again, it's never like the easiest situation. It's never, the story is supposed to resemble a conversation. Um but the actual interviewing actually more resembles like a job interview. It could be very awkward. Okay, but one of the main things you want to make sure that you have is essentially the control of the interview. Dealing with reluctant sources and asking tough questions. I mean, that you can get really thrown off by like certain people who might not ask you like just all the right questions. Okay, I mean, I might just like put you, or might not just want to like answer the questions. But you do the best you can. You try to like just stay on track. That's why it's always good to have like something prepared ahead of time. Um, a lot of times people will interview people like through email. I have some professors who will actually really hate that. Like I tell you, I mean, I'm kind of more of a younger generation, believe it or not. I'm 55, but I actually am totally fine with that. In fact, especially when we deal with like numbers and things like that, and you're getting data and stuff like that, online email interviews are actually much better, because then I remember having to get like numbers and stuff like that over the phone. That was such a pain in the ass. You never really know if you actually heard the person right. You have to go back and interview them again because maybe it didn't sound right. So yeah, so I would just say that actually, like, the interviewing, and getting that, sorry, I'm just trying to find the areas, and making sure that I'm off today. I don't know why. It's because I was thrown off by the whole Mets thing. Um, just basically like email interviews are fine, I think. The only problem is just that, when you actually do like a face-to-face interview, or more common, like a telephone interview or something like that, cell phone, whatever, you can get more of a nuance of like, you can almost like, there's much less of a chance of quoting somebody out of context because you can kind of tell by the way they talk. Obviously, say somebody says something along the lines of like, they could be sarcastic. They could say something along the lines of like, I never took the money, I never took the money, there's like that kind of thing. There's that difference there. Where maybe you can they feel a little bit more assured. They say like, I never took the money. They kind of, you kind of feel like, well, is he really kind of telling the truth? They sound like they're more in denial about it, a little more, a little harder denial. Okay. Um, okay. Um, taking notes. I always tell people that I might, again, if I've repeated some of this, I'm sorry, but again, I always tell people internalize. Really, like sometimes maybe it's a good idea, maybe put the notebook down and just like kind of listen to what people are saying, and then summarize what they say. If I said this before, I'm just going to repeat it again because I think it's important to know. And again, basically, write, not summarize. I'm sorry, internal. Not, wow, I am something else today. It's this way. Listen, summarize. You got to listen to what people are saying. Don't write down everything that's being said. You got to understand what's being said so you can ask the questions and know exactly what they're talking about and summarize. Write, not summarize. Oh my God, I'm doing it again. Internalize and understand what they say. God. And then write, summarize. You don't write down everything everybody's ever says because if you do that, you're not, that's like almost like rote memory. You don't really listen, don't really know what's going on. And again, if I have told this story again, I apologize, but you want to be, I had a fellow student in psychology class, and she wrote down everything that was ever said. We got better grades than she did because we read her notes. I have to admit, sometimes I missed class. I was on a target at the time, very busy. Sorry. So then so we got a better grade than she did because she would just write down everything that was ever said while we would take notes and summarize what she would say, and we got better grades because we understood. We would actually read what she would say and learn it first. Recorded interviews. I mean, you always want to try to like record an interview, I would say, especially as a backup. Um, you know, because sometimes you might have a situation where, you know, your notes may not be the best. You want to just want to fall. You don't want to fall in the trap where you get too reliant on recordings because that can also. I mean, it's a much improved system nowadays with the audio recordings. It used to be really hard with the old fashioned tape because you had to actually like wind yourself to the tape part, which you couldn't always do. But now with like video, you have like you can instantly have things that like translate, transcribe notes and things in the notes. I do it all the time. I'm actually writing a book right now on a guy who dealt with like racism in a unique way, I would say, throughout his life. And now he's dealing with some other issues to this day, age 66, still racism. And my friend and I actually like just record everything. And that way, like, yes, we take notes at the same time because we're actually trying to really understand what he's saying as he's saying it. And we can actually ask questions and summarize in our notes and kind of go back on those notes and say, like, okay, what do you mean here? And so it's actually a good kind of like learning technique to actually like take the notes like you would in a classroom and kind of like make sure you understand what they're saying. But then you have the electronic notes as kind of transcriptions as backup in case you miss something. And then you can go back again, maybe ask questions. Okay. All right. I want to show you something here. And this will go to the whole thing about like asking the right questions. And I don't know where, there it is. And basically like and how showing how those questions can kind of like ultimately lead the story through the use of transitions. And this is actually something I just showed my my in-person class. It's just a horrible, tragic story. This is going back to 1988 February. When you're actually doing like sort of an interview, sometimes you can actually like find additional stories within the interview that may like break off or the original may break off into like what they would call essentially as a follow-up. or a sidebar. Okay. So that's something to keep in mind. Basically, is that like sometimes like you don't just get like one interview from one story from an interview. Sometimes you get like other stories, or sometimes you do a story, and then like from that interview process, like I said, you might want to like follow it up, and you use those notes for the follow up story. Okay. So this particular story was actually unfortunately, it was a 19-year-old man who I say kid really, but he drank 33 kamikazes. Isn't that awful? Um, and he was actually he died unfortunately, and it was at a fraternity called Lambda Chi Alpha. Those of you who have been around campus, it's actually the site where the Kabod House is now presently. We didn't really think much of this fraternity as like one of those fraternities that might end up this way, but you never with fraternities, you never know. But that's what happened, and they actually indicted, I believe, like 33 people. I don't know if they meant to do that on purpose, but so what you'll see in this actually this video is actually you'll see that actually there's a main story, the follow up story that basically talks about like what's the latest with this. It's probably not even like 30 seconds. What's the latest with this investigation and everything into the story, and then it evolves into a follow up story, another follow up story, and then the follow up story deals with the reaction on campus. It's not the best put together story and everything, but you can see actually the story move in steps. Okay, and you can see that it's essentially the interviewing or questions essentially are the transitions to the story. They help basically guide the reader from place to place, piece to piece of the story. Okay, so basically that's how essentially like your questions and interviewing intermingle with the ultimate transition structure of a story. Okay, so let's look at this.
Medical tests are still being conducted on the body of a Rutgers University freshman to find out if he drank himself to death at a fraternity pledge party. News 4's Perry Phelps visited.
Okay, so that's the initial story, basically just kind of following up on what's the latest there. Now we have the reaction that goes to campus. I would say this lead that she has is like a really long lead, but ultimately it gets to what the central point is.
Campus today. At first glance, this fraternity looks like any other on the Rutgers University campus, but a closer examination reveals the remnants of an all-night pledge party that has closed the Greek house of Lambda Chi Alpha, a pledge party that has left freshman James Callahan dead, apparently from drinking too much, and another student treated at a nearby hospital for alcohol-related illness.
The university is.
Now he's part of the reaction, but they haven't really gotten to the lead just yet.
Warning because of it. It's a terrible situation, terrible incident, and it's one that I think we process and think carefully about a number of issues.
Callahan was one of 13 students who had been invited to join the all-male fraternity. According to one student, pledges were told to drink until they got sick, and evidently that's not an uncommon sight around the university.
So I'd say that's essentially the lead. Now they get. I mean, I feel like this is a story that almost seems to kind of perpetuate forever, and they're kind of like, are they really revealing anything new? But now they're going to move from person to person to basically kind of give that those perspectives on the story. Okay.
I think a lot of people get very drunk. I think if you ride a campus bus on a Friday or Saturday night, you see people getting sick on themselves. You see people passing out. I think it's a big problem.
It's widespread throughout the campus.
Look familiar? Yeah, boy, things change, don't they?
Dirty in the dorms, wherever. And I don't know how they're going to stop it.
Callahan and the rest of the students pledging the fraternity were all under the legal drinking age of 21, a legal limit that students admit is easy to get around, and a problem school administrators acknowledge.
All right, so basically, whenever they get to usually when they get to that real estate scene where they show the area, that's essentially a transition on a broadcast news, okay? And that's when you usually have the reporter kind of chime in and basically guide you from place to place. So basically, the first part dealt with essentially what is going on campus, and that is the horrible throwing up your shoes and blah 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 all this stuff. And yes, and that was me. And then basically, I always felt like they kind of quoted me out of context because basically I was trying to say hey, this is nothing unusual. People drink on campus. but not necessarily get sick on their shoes on all over the place on campus. I was trying to say that, and I was actually talking about how the media was maybe making too much of it, but they took out a little bit of what they thought worked. That's fine. Now they transition to like, what are they doing about it essentially? Okay. So it's like there's two what's being answered here, and she's guiding you through her questions, her interviews. Okay. Transition to transition. And then essentially what's happening here with the people being interviewed, I know I say quotes are different from anecdotes, but these essentially are anecdotes. The people are being interviewed are essentially providing those kind of real world story within a story anecdotes, like the one person talking about people on the bus, being on the scene, the depth that we need for the story to show like real life, how it's being impacted here.
We try and encourage students to run non-alcoholic parties. We have enforcement regulations and policies, but peer pressure is still very, very strong. Combating all of those efforts that we may take.
Fraternities will almost become like drinking clubs now, so that I think it was not about time something like this happened. I wish it had been something where it was just a shock, but maybe this was just change to the atmosphere of fraternities here to clean up their act.
Do you think it's going to change partying habits here at the school?
I don't think so. Not on a long-term basis anyway. I think that for a while things will slow down and then they'll get back to the regular behavior, basically.
And after the fact at Lambda Chi Alpha, all fraternity and sorority parties have been temporarily banned. Harry Peltz, News 4, New Brunswick.
Yeah, they were banned for a year. So I'm not done yet. Obviously, I got more to do. But I'm just going to stop the share for a second if I can get rid of this pinwheel here. And boy, it goes really slowly. And that's obviously like what I don't need. Okay. So yeah, so that's basically how the broadcaster brings you from place to place, point to point. Again, basically how questions can essentially overlap with transitions, transitions overlap with questions to help guide you through the story. Okay. From interviewing comes ideas. Basically, like I said, sometimes like a lot of times you don't get like just one story out of an interview. You might get like two or a couple or that sort of thing. And we saw that actually this past week with the Joe Biden interview. It's kind of interesting actually how that went. I don't know if you saw it, but he basically he actually made some news. They even mentioned that at the outset. And it can show you also though that like how like also an interview can kind of go in a direction where you feel like maybe you have to like stay on that direction, which they didn't really do here. But here we have like essentially CBS's transcript here. Okay. And it's actually talking about the inflation rate, how it's still high. Basically you have Biden saying, like, don't worry about it, it's staying the same, don't worry about it. It's not like, it's not like it's gotten higher. But our position we have it hasn't spiked, all this stuff. So it deals a lot with the economy, which is like the first thing that's on people's minds right now. Okay. But as they're kind of like transitioning and moving from place to place, which is what Scott Pelley from CBS News is doing here, they find themselves as some sort of an auto show. And then basically, here's an interesting question. Mr. President, first Detroit auto show in 3 years. Is the pandemic over? President Joe Biden, the pandemic is over. Wow, I didn't know that. What's interesting about that? By reading it on paper, you don't really know how he said it. Actually, I watched the interview, and actually how he said it was essentially like this. The pandemic is over. So it was kind of like, he kind of said it almost like matter of factly. And when I read this like quote in a lot of different stories and stuff like that, it made it sound like he was actually celebrating it, but actually it was kind of like, but after he said the pandemic is over, he said, we still have a problem with COVID. Okay. Some of you have even told me I've had a problem with COVID because some members of our class have had it already. So, and my in-person class, a couple of people have had it too. We still have a lot of work on it, but the pandemic is over. If you notice, no one's wearing masks, except in the classrooms at Rutgers. Everybody seems to be in pretty good shape. They actually didn't hone on that, but I would have actually probably, maybe they did, but I would have probably honed in right on that right there, where you're basically dealing with like economy and Ukraine and all this other stuff. But wow, this big news coming from the president. Now he's not a scientist, so it's not like you can consider maybe the most official declaration in the world, but it basically it also will speak to policy and how maybe things are treated, and now maybe, how they maybe deal with things like, um, you know, the economy and like opening things up and like what they're going to encourage people to do. And it may mean like there's no need for like any kind of maybe additional aid or anything like that. They've had the college, the debt relief and things like that, which you could say was kind of related to COVID, but you know, but also I mean, if they're not going to like focus on this interview, which I think they're trying to cover a lot of issues, I would probably, I mean, this obviously, like I said, became a separate story. Suddenly we had this little piece out of everything else. Suddenly it gets like its own headline, gets its own questions: who, what, where, why, when, and you get a whole separate story out of it. In that case, it would be called a sidebar. Okay. So you have your follow-ups and then you have your sidebars. So this became essentially a sidebar. And then, like I said, they wouldn't interview just Joe Biden, interview scientists. Fauci, he's still around. I think he's going to retire into the year, that sort of thing. Okay. So, all right. So, you would maybe like want to talk to him and take it on from there. Okay. Before I go into that, I'm actually going to talk about chapter 10 a little bit. What that was about, quotations and attribution. Okay. This is a little bit of a shift. I really wanted to kind of concentrate on the interview stuff first, but I just want to say that this actually is a good chapter to go over because it kind of further reemphasizes like what I've been talking about in terms of like making sure that you have like he said and she said, and not relying so heavily on the direct quotations here. Okay. It's really much better to actually like talk about, to paraphrase more than actually, you can use partial quotations where you have maybe like part of the sentence is actually in your words, and then maybe like something that can be highlighted, like the pandemic is over, that sort of thing. And that part maybe is in quotes. Transitions and anecdotes helps kind of set up quotes too. So that's another reason why it's actually kind of good to follow that pattern. Okay. That I spoke about earlier. Attribution, as I've mentioned before, the point of that is to really kind of give some sort of validity to the reported information you have in your story. So, you usually try to get like that attribution maybe like in the middle of a quote or the end of a quote, or if you're something that's paraphrased in the middle of the paraphrase, the end of the paraphrase, or if it's like an easy name, maybe pronounce, maybe put at the beginning. Okay. All right. Identifying sources. There is something we could talk a little bit about with that, and that is that you actually have different types of sources. We're not going to like do that in this class so much, but other than like on the record with name sources. Okay. We're not going to, I should say, we're not going to do it at all with these so-called off the record sources. Okay. But there are different ways of actually obtaining information. You can get it you get it on the record, and that's basically where it's usable and with a name. Okay. But there are different types of on the record. Okay. You could have something that's actually called without attribution, or as background, and that's your sources said thing, where you basically like want to protect somebody's identity, that sort of thing. A lot of people actually like don't like doing that because you can figure it out anyway. And also there still isn't like a lot of credibility. A lot of people don't feel like they can really trust that so much still these days. Although I don't know, whenever they take polls of that and they say like, oh, we don't trust anonymous sources, I feel like sometimes people are like not telling the truth, because I feel like people will a lot of times will believe what they read. So a lot of times these things that are actually sourced like that, like anonymously, turn out to be true anyway. Okay. Then you have off the record. There's also a thing called deep background, where you actually will actually print something but without attribution at all. Okay. But you know it to be true. It's essentially like without attribution. But if you actually put like a source set on it, it's probably some information that maybe only one or two people know. And that person actually could still get themselves into trouble, because the people maybe who work around them, like in the White House or something, will know it came from that person. So they'll put deep background and have no attribution at all. So then that kind of leaves them guessing a little more. There's off the record, which means that basically you're not supposed to use the information at all. Okay. That means you're not supposed to use the information at all. So why would you actually, there are people who do off the record interviews. Why would they do that? If they can't use the information at all? Well, it's actually a good idea because if you're getting something that's really highly sensitive in nature, you want to like basically get it, but then maybe what you do is you confirm it elsewhere. Okay. You go some other place else and just do that because sometimes you just, at least you'll find out something that to yourself only that you didn't know before. So then you can just go around, maybe I'll go, hopefully you without maybe through background or maybe even on the record, get it on the record. Okay. All right. All right. Oops. I hit that by accident. Hold on one sec. So I make sure I've had all my bases covered. Now I'm going to talk about the next assignment. Okay. Yeah. Next assignment. So, all right, this is actually the teacher view. Okay. And what I have actually, you're gonna have a little bit more time on this assignment, but this is actually a two-parter. And initially, you're not going to be graded. Okay. But this is something I actually haven't posted yet. I'm gonna say it's actually Saturday. I'm going to post this video on Monday along with this assignment. But going with the whole idea of like interviewing and picking out ideas and things like that, and then ultimately like put them into story form through the use of transitions. That all starts with like that whole process of interviewing and picking an idea and coming up with the questions, stuff like that. It doesn't usually start with some sort of a boss. Okay, it usually starts with you. Okay, reporters are self-starters, especially nowadays. Okay, nowadays, I mean, edit staffs are a lot smaller. There's not a lot of people actually editing your stories. Actually, a lot of times you have to edit your own story. So you have to come up with your own ideas now, basically. Okay. So, so what I'm going to ask you to do essentially is to do that is you're going to actually pick your next story assignment. Yay. And that story itself is actually due in 2 weeks from now. Okay. But what's due before then, it's going to be due this Thursday. I'm asking you guys to come up with your own ideas. Okay. So what I have here is being a journalist means being a self-starter. That means being independent, coming up with their own ideas. It also helps if you want to understand the importance of finding the unique angle in a story. Okay. And those ideas often come, oh, that's terrible how that's worded, right? Oops. Often come, oh my God, look how I phrase this. It's funny. It's a good thing I didn't post this yet, right? Anyway, those ideas usually come from like, often come from knowing the world around you and talking to, and as well as talking to people and interviewing people. Okay. So yeah, I mean, just basically like having some sort of institutional knowledge, like what's going on around you. A lot of times will put a reporter, or require them to actually live within the beat, he or she, that they actually cover. Okay. A lot of times, because they feel like you get like maybe mail or whatever, you get like things in the mail, email, whatever, you'll have an idea what's going on in town. That's important. Sometimes actually it's not a good idea because if you actually live in town, you could be a little bit too biased to the town. You could be a little bit too in bed with the town. Sorry. And it's better to maybe have that 10,000 foot, there's that phrase again, look from above where you can be objective and see things from a fresh perspective. Doesn't matter, but usually having some sort of knowledge around you is actually helps. So what I'm asking you to do is to please come up with 5 story ideas that are records related and submit to this assignment entry by Thursday, September 29th. I will choose the best idea and that person will get extra credit. Yay, a great hire on the next assignment. That'll be the whatever assignment I develop out of here. The best idea will be your next graded assignment. Here, okay, so whatever I pick, and I'll be picking it by the next time I do a tape, next time I do this remote interview, which will be next week. That's when you'll learn what that assignment is. I want you to keep the idea simple. Okay, no major investigations. I've had people say like, I'm going to go undercover with blah 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 at the Broward Commons, whatever. No, not that. We want something that's going to be done essentially, ultimately it'll be like in a week. Okay, I know I'm giving you 2 weeks, but essentially it's actually just going to be a week to do the story. Okay, so so just do something that you feel like you can do in a week, and I want you to keep it Rutgers related. Okay, Something that maybe like, I can't give away any hints here because I want to see what you can come up with. But something related to the students have to deal with on a regular basis. And again, think of what's to be done in a week. Stories are about people. So theme your ideas that will require reactions, very preferably from your students because professors, people like that are usually hard to contact. I've had people say basically they're going to do an expose on the buses or something like that. Well, then I want you to interview bus drivers or people in the bus department, and I think bus drivers have been told that they can't talk to anybody, especially reporters. So, I don't want you to end up in that entanglement. If you actually pick an idea that just involves the students, just do that. Now, some of you may not be on campus, may not be able to do that. So what I do is I'll actually have a discussion point. And then this is where, remember what I said at the beginning of the semester, some people ask, how do you do class participation or remote class? Well, this is where that's going to come. Whatever idea I pick, I'm going to put up a discussion point. Okay. And then I'm going to expect people to actually participate in that discussion point. And if you don't, then that'll be a mark against you in terms of class participation. So make sure that you do. Okay. All right, so that's it. And I appreciate everything. So remember that you got the rewrite due for the profile assignment, which due Monday, and then you have the leads assignment that's also due. Okay. Thanks very much, and I'll be talking to you.